Hi, and thanks for logging on to the Daily Dvar. And here's a brand new halacha for you. It's a double halacha. It's going to cover you for Friday the 15th of February and also for Sunday the 17th of February while I'm traveling at an NCSY Shabbaton. So here's your first half. Listen to this on Friday, God willing. This is your law. You know that whenever you make a hamotzi at the beginning of the meal, that bracha of hamotzi covers just about everything inside of the meal. There are certain exceptions. The thinking is that the bread is the main part of the meal, and all those other foods are the types of food that you eat together with the bread, but the bread is the main, and all the other things like the meat, etc., don't need a bracha. Now, the intricacies of this law they're basically built on the premise that when you have meat in a meal, the common way, although not all of us do this nowadays, the common way when all these laws were being established, the common way was that you would have your meat in a sandwich type of operation together with your bread. So the bread was the main bracha, you made your hamotzi, and all the other things were kind of just like tagged along with them, like the meat. The same thing applies to all of the things like the bread, the pasta, the rice, the cooked vegetables, etc., etc., etc. They're all looked at as something. Now, you don't stuff them all in your sandwich, and you and I know that today in our Western style of eating, we often eat them separate, and they're not really being eaten together with the bread, but they're still considered foods that go with bread. So even if you eat them separate from the bread, the hamotzi bracha covers for all of them. Okay, that's your basic law. That'll be your Friday law, that hamotzi covers everything in a meal because the hamotzi is the main food and other things are looked at as if they're eaten with the bread, even though you sometimes eat them separate. That's your main law. Tune me out now, and right here is where you'll pick up on Sunday and hear the second half of the halacha. Therefore, the very interesting question, your Sunday law, is what do you do about desserts? You probably heard a little bit about this. We're going to try and clarify the laws exactly. A dessert, the rabbis view a dessert as needing its own separate bracha because it fits into this kind of category. First of all, it's not the type of food that you necessarily eat with bread. And secondly, it's something that you're not really eating as part of the meal. You're quite full already. This is just a follow-up to the meal. And that's why many of these types of desserts that we're going to list do actually get their own bracha, again, because they're not commonly eaten with bread, and secondly, they are not really being eaten because you're hungry. They're just like the something that you add on at the end of the meal. Therefore, whenever having raw fruit at the end of a meal in dessert, you make a special separate borei pri ha'etz on the raw fruit. If you have cooked fruit, the same thing applies according to most of the rabbis, and it would be safe for you to follow that ruling, that you make a separate borei pri ha'etz on the cooked fruit that you eat at the end of a meal. Things like popcorn, borei pri ha'adama. They're not really eaten as part of the meal, etc. Same thing with peanuts, same thing with chocolate. Even though it's a shahakal, it's separate and it's eaten as a topping onto the meal, and therefore that also would get its own separate bracha. Same thing would be true of ice cream, sherbet, or anything of the sort. You would make its own separate shahakal on those things at the end of the meal. Lastly, we'll tell you for today is coffee and tea. Now, they're interesting. Some people say that coffee and tea drunken at the end of the meal are part of the meal. And there are some rabbis that say, no, you're basically full. This is just an add-on to the meal to help with digestion or something, but it's not really the meal. And therefore, some people say that even the coffee and tea get their own separate bracha. So Rabbi Neustadt recommends that the safest thing to do if you do want to have a cup of coffee at the end of a meal and you don't want to be in this doubtful situation of should I or shouldn't I make a bracha, the best thing to do is to have something that's shahakal with that dessert that certainly requires a bracha, like sherbet, ice cream, chocolate, or whatever. Make the shahakal on that, and that will cover for the coffee or tea that you're drinking at the end of the meal. Thanks for logging on. Log on again tomorrow for more. Bye-bye.